During the recess, we will have the clerk mark them. Marking a photograph of what appears to be an office with a 2 on the upper right-hand corner in the back photograph. Another photograph of the office with an apparent body in the location, number 3, for identification. Another photograph of an apparent body of the individual, number 4, for identification. Another photograph of a hand which appears to have a handgun in the hand, number 5, for identification. Another photograph of a portion of an office with a blue chair in it, number 6, for identification. Another photograph of what appears to be an office. This one contains a green board, chalkboard, number 7, for identification. Next, a photograph of what appears to be a desk and wall in an office, number 8, for identification. Another, number 9, for identification, a desk and a couple of file cabinets and a storage facility, number 9, for identification. And the last photograph of a desk chair with a black leather, appearing to be a black leather jacket in the chair, number 10, for identification. So it is peoples 2 through 10, photographs as you have described. Thank you, Your Honor. Please proceed. I invite your attention to number 2 for identification. Do you recognize what that photograph purports to represent? Yes, I do. What is that? That appears to be Dr. Cooper's office. And did it appear in this fashion when you first arrived at that office on October 13, 1984, shortly after 3 in the afternoon? Yes, it does. I invite your attention to number 3 for identification. Do you recognize what that purports to represent? Yes, I do. What is that? That's the body that I saw as I entered Dr. Cooper's office. Okay. Now, this body that appears in number 3 for identification, did you recognize that person? No, I didn't readily identify the person. Four voice for 15 minutes. Starts with question by plaintiff's attorney. Ready? Now, on February 15 at about 11:30 in the morning, were you on duty? Yes, sir. And at that time, did you go to the San Julian Hotel at 520 South San Julian in the city and county of Los Angeles? Yes, sir. Did you go alone or with a partner? I was with Officers Mike Glenn and Roger Murphy. And did you have information that caused you to go there? Yes, Officer Murphy. I saw him receive a phone call and then he advised me of some information. Calls for hearsay, overruled. Now, what was the information of which he advised you? He told me there was objection, hearsay, overruled. Now, there was an individual inside the hotel by the name of Pallone, I believe it's pronounced. Now, that was a complaint of narcotics activity coming. And did he say Pallone was complaining or someone else was complaining about him? Somebody else was complaining about him, an individual named Pallone. And did Officer Murphy tell you of his physical description? I don't recall if he did or not, to tell you the truth. I just remember the name. He was talking about the name. And did Officer Murphy tell you anything about where he was or what he was doing that was connected to this narcotics complaint? Objection, leading, overruled. From what I recall, it was supposed to be selling. He was supposed to live somewhere in the hotel, but I don't recall the conversation that we had. After you received this information, where did you and Officers Nagel, Murphy, and Glenn go after you received this information? Where did you and the Officers Murphy and Glenn go? To the hotel. And when you got there, did you go to the hotel on foot or in a vehicle? In a vehicle. What was the weather like that morning? It seemed to me it was clear, I believe. That's the best I can recall. I think it was clear. Do you remember whether or not it had been raining a short time before or whether the ground was wet or anything like that? Objection, leading, overruled. The ground was wet. I think this was because there was a guy out on the sidewalk hosing down the sidewalk, but I don't recall it being raining, no. And when you and Officers Murphy and Glenn got to the scene, what did you do? Went inside to the lobby area, and basically I saw them, they were talking to the manager, somebody who lived where the manager's office was at, and I just stood by the stairway. Your Honor, Mr. Brody and I were discussing, he has shown me some photographs of the inside of the hotel, and diagrams, and we were discussing when they would be used. They will be used during cross-examination of Officer Nagel. All right, okay. When you went to the hotel, what did Officers Murphy and Glenn do? As I said, we were kind of by the front door where the manager's office is at, and there was a little old lady who I think was a manager. They were talking to her. Now, when you walk in the front door, is it a flat area or do you have to walk up some steps? Well, there is 2 doors. Actually, there is a door, and then I believe you have to walk up 1 step, and then you walk in another door where you are actually inside the hotel, and that's a flat area right there. And is that where you and the officers Glenn and Murphy went initially? Yes, right inside the hotel, inside both doors. And when you contacted the manager of the hotel, did she give you any additional information regarding the complaints about this person named Pallone? I wasn't talking to her. I was over by the stairway, so I didn't talk to her. How far away were you from the manager's door, manager's office there? Maybe 6, 8 feet or so, not too far. It wasn't too far away. And what was your role then in the, I suppose, for lack of a better term, investigation at that point? I was basically what you would call a covering officer. Like any call that we go to, there is 1 or more individuals. One officer will do the talking to an individual, and the other officer will stand back and be the covering officer, watch for any approaching people, any unusual activity, basically be his guard. At that point, when Officers Glenn and Murphy were speaking to the woman, the manager, were there other people, hotel residents, guests, other people in the area that you could see? No. At some point, did you see someone who is in this courtroom? Yes, sir. Could you point out where he is sitting and what he is wearing? The individual with the orange jumpsuit and white sneakers seated to the right of defense counsel, indicating the defendant for the record. And where was defendant Christman when you first saw him? Coming down the stairs, almost coming beside me. So he wasn't at the top of the stairs, he was closer to the bottom? I believe so. I wasn't sure from reading over the report. I wasn't quite sure if I remember hearing him come down the stairs, and I am not sure if I peeked around a little storage area where I was standing by or not. So I just recall him coming down almost beside me. And at that point, did you see anything in his hand? Objection, leading, overruled. When he came beside me? Yes. What did you see? 2 clear Ziplocs containing off-white solid rock cocaine base he had in his left hand, appearing to be rock cocaine base. Could you tell, or could you have estimated how many rocks appeared to be in each bag? Not really. I could just tell there was quite a few. I couldn't tell you how many. It was more than 2 or 3. And did he have something in his right hand? Objection, leading, overruled. He might have, but I don't recall. How far away from you was he when you observed this? Maybe 1 or 2 feet. He was basically on one side of the stairway or stairway railing, and I was on the other side. Was there anything blocking your view of the baggies in his hand when you saw them? No. And when you first saw him, in which direction was the defendant looking? Appeared to be looking down into his hand. What was the next thing that had happened? He had walked past me and right off onto the landing. Then he quickly walked out the front door between Officers Murphy and Officer Glenn. Now, what were you wearing that morning? It was plain clothes, street clothes. I don't recall, really. I am not sure if it was shorts or jeans. It was just regular street clothes. Were you wearing anything that would indicate you were a police officer? Yes, I had a belt on, a gun on the belt. There was also an extra magazine of ammo, and my Los Angeles Police Department badge was on my belt, and that was visible. Were you wearing a windbreaker or anything at that point that day, if you recall? No, sir, I wasn't. Were you wearing any jacket of any kind that day? No. I think just a regular shirt, but I had that tucked inside the belt. So there was nothing covering your belt that displayed your gun and all the things that were on your belt, is that right? Yes, sir, that's correct. And did Officer Murphy or Officer Glenn have any reaction to the defendant walking outside the hotel? Well, when he walked out between them, I said something to the effect, he has got dope, or something similar to that. And basically, I kind of pushed them out the door after him. Pushed who out of the door? Officer Murphy and Officer Glenn. Were they between you and the front door? Yes, sir. And which officer went out the door first? That I don't know. They both go out about the same time? Yeah. I know I was the last one out the door, but it could have been Officer Glenn. I want to say that, but I am not positive on that because, like I said, I pushed them out the door trying to get out myself. What tone of voice did you say? He has got dope or something to that effect? I think it was more a statement. It wasn't a big yell because they were right a few feet from me, so it wasn't a big yell or anything. When the defendant left the hotel, you said he walked quickly, or you said he left quickly. And did he walk or run or something else? Well, as soon as you get off the landing, he just basically turned left and moved quickly between my partners, which is right out the front door. After I got out the front door, he appeared to be running north on San Julian, and that's when I observed him. He fell, and I also fell. And he fell, I believe, in the street, and I fell on the sidewalk. How far away were you from him when he fell? Maybe 15 feet or so. Is it 1-5 or 5-0? 1-5. And was there anything blocking or obstructing your view of him at that point where he fell? No. I remember seeing him fall, but I mean, my partners might have. They were ahead of me, so they might have been partially obstructed. But I remember seeing him fall down. After he fell down, what happened? He got back up. When he went out the door, he kind of made, I don't know, kind of a flailing motion with his left hand. This was before he fell or after? This was before he fell. When he went out the door, where were you? I was, like I said, I was pushing my other Officer Murphy and Officer Glenn out the door in front of me. I got out. He made a flailing motion. He was already in the street. Who is he that you are talking about? The defendant, sir. If you could demonstrate the motion he made. It was like, the way I kind of remember it, it was either off to the side or up like this. For the record, the witness indicated with his left hand a tossing motion either to the side or up as if over his left shoulder. Is that correct? Yeah, kind of, not quite backwards like that, but kind of maybe a 3/4 angle. Not quite over the left shoulder? Yes, sir. And where were you when you saw him make that motion? Just coming out the door. I believe it was on the steps or just coming down off the steps. At that point, was there anything blocking your view of him when he made that motion? No, not that I can recall, no. Let's strike that. When he made the motion, did you see anything come out of his hands or his hand? I stand corrected. Specifically, no, I couldn't tell what it was because shortly thereafter I fell. But it seemed to me that something did, but I couldn't say exactly what it was. And with which hand did he make the motion? His left hand. And then after he made the motion, how far did he get before he fell? A few feet, not too many. He fell down, I believe it was in the street, and I think I fell down right at the edge of the sidewalk to the street, or just in the street itself. I am not sure. Did you see anything? If anything fell from the defendant as he fell? No, not then, no. What happened next? He got up, I was getting up. He went a little further north of San Julian. He tried to run around. It was either, I think it was a light pole that's there, and he kind of cut back down south. He fell again, and then at that time when he fell down again, he tossed like a fanny pack. And then Officer Glenn caught him there in the street. And where was that? Basically, almost in the middle of the street of San Julian. And where was that in relation to 5th Street? It's all south. It's probably, I don't know, maybe more than 25 feet north of the hotel itself. Now, other than the time that he fell, when he was standing up and moving outside the hotel, how would you characterize his movement? In other words, was he running? Was he walking? Was he jogging? What was he doing? Basically running, trying to run. And did you see Officer Murphy take him into custody? It was Officer Glenn, I believe. Officer Glenn? Yes. Did you see him do that? Yes, sir. Then what happened? Another partner officer of ours arrived at the location, and also a black and white arrived. And after the other officers arrived, was there any property that was recovered? I picked up the fanny pack. From where did you pick that up? It was over by the curb. It was in the street of San Julian, basically a few feet from where the defendant had eventually ended up falling in the street. The second time? Yes, sir. And where was the first time? Strike that. Where was the defendant the first time you saw that fanny pack? Where was he when I first saw it? Yes, I believe like in the street, because I didn't pay any attention to it when he was coming down the stairs. So I just recall when he fell again and tried to throw it, push it away from him. I didn't hear the last answer. Did one of your partner officers, specifically Officer Glenn, recover a knife? Objection, relevance, overruled. He advised me, but I don't specifically recall him recovering it. No. He told me he did. But you didn't see where he recovered it, is that correct? That's correct. I move to strike it, Your Honor. He told me he did is stricken. And did you go back towards the area where you saw the defendant make the throwing motion around his left shoulder? Yes, sir. When you went back to that area, did you look on the ground there? I was looking, yes, sir. Did you see anything that you had seen previously? I did after Officer Murphy had it in his hand. He had objection, non-responsive, overruled. He had 2 Ziplocs. Each appeared to contain an off-white solid resembling cocaine base inside. Had you seen those baggies before? They appeared to be the same ones that the defendant was holding earlier when he was walking down the stairs. Now, the second time that you saw those baggies, that is when Officer Murphy had them in his hand. Let me back up for a second. Did you see those baggies at any time between the time that the defendant left the hotel and the time Officer Murphy had those baggies in his possession? No, because when he went out of the hotel, I couldn't see. When I went after him, when he got me out of the hotel, his back was to me, so I couldn't see him. I didn't see him again until specifically knowing that it was those until Officer Murphy had them. May I have just a moment, Your Honor? Yes. And how long did you see those baggies in the left hand of the defendant? Maybe a second or two. It was right when he was walking past me. What was the position of his hands when he was holding the baggies as he was walking past you? His left hand specifically. It was kind of out in front of him, cupped a little bit, but I could see what was inside of his hand, and he, like I said, appeared to look down at it. Were the baggies hanging out or like cupped up in his hand? No, they were inside the palm of his hand. And when you were looking at those baggies, were you looking down directly in front of you or up or to the side or what? Objection, vague and compound, overruled. Maybe slightly, because I was on the ground level, the landing level, and he was coming down the stairs. And as he was coming down, I saw him and his hand. And so it would almost be a combination of the 3, because they were up at almost my eye level, or maybe a little bit below. And as he descended down the last 2 stairs or so, his hand became lower until he turned and walked out the door. So when his hand was lower, you were looking into his hand from a little bit above, is that right? Yes, sir. I have no further questions. Cross? Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. And before I begin, would you just take a moment to look at that diagram that I have drawn and see if, in your opinion, that fairly represents the area in and around this hotel? Deposition? Yes. And when is that deposition dated that you signed? That's this date right here. 5th day of December, 88. Is that your signature? Yes. Would it be fair to say, sir, that you probably corrected your deposition sometime in December, 88? Possibility, yes. Now, just so I understand, sir, you knew what the property was worth, about what it was worth, at least you've told us here, not only in your deposition, but you told us today that you thought it was worth roughly $160,000. Is that correct? Roughly, yeah. And you were selling your interest for $40,000 plus whatever Arlen paid on the property after, March of 85, right? I was paying $38,000 plus whatever $38,000 plus whatever he had paid? Okay. Actually would be half of what he paid, right? Because you still owned the property half and half? Yeah, but he was buying me out, so he took his half and my half and put all his labor and material, most of the money, his own, at that point when I decided to sell out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you were giving up a considerable amount of equity in the property. We only had it for a couple years. I didn't think I had a whole lot of equity in a short period of time. You were willing to give up whatever equity you had in the property too. I figured it had $5,000 in equity. From the time I bought it and sold it, I had probably $5,000 in equity accumulated from the 2 years I owned it. I don't want to muddle in this, sir, but again, I think you told us that you roughly estimated your equity to be in the neighborhood of 55, 60, 70,000, or as high as 80. That's counting all the money I put in it. I thought you meant minus the money. But you were actually being bought out for $38,000 plus the money that Arlen paid, right, which is about another $38,000 that he assumed. $38,000 that he assumed. By the time you take half of the second loan, which is $20,000 that I owned, he assumed. You confused me. He assumed my $20,000 that I owed on the second mortgage, so that's $20,000 that he assumed. He assumed $10,000, which would be your share. No, it's 40, so my share would be 20. Okay. Execute any agreement related to that assumption of that debt that Arlen was going to assume for you. I didn't understand your question. Did you execute any agreement related to that assumption of debt that Arlen was assuming? It was just a verbal agreement between me and him. Okay. So if Arlen decided, hey, I ain't paying you, I'm not going to pay anything on this, objection, argumentative, sustained. So as far as any legal recourse that you know of, you didn't have any against Arlen if he decided not to pay on the second mortgage and see me. Objection, Your Honor, sustained. And do you know whether or not during the course of, after that transaction, well, at least the quitclaim transaction in '85, if anything was going on the second mortgage, that was up to Arlen. He was taking care of it. It was out of my hands. You don't know? I don't know. At that point, it was all his